3 weeks ago was our first race. Last week was our first race. So we headed down to Clinton County Speedway for an action-packed night of racing. After a good finish in the heat race, that put me in a great position to start the feature, and things were looking good. The car wasn't nearly as good as it was before the crash, but we were able to limp it home to 8th. After the race, I happened to leave the GoPro on for about 20 minutes, just capturing nothing except for this.
Alright, so I'm leaving this message for Joe Lusk Racing from YouTube Racing. We got a couple holes to fill.
Alright, so we're back after the first race where we put the new body on the car, and so come with me as we take all this stuff apart and then go about fixing it, replacing it, whatever we need to do to get our car back ready to race next time. Step 1 was to remove all these clever little fasteners called Zeus fasteners. They work by gripping a spring with this little metal channel. Something funny is that this aluminum bracing, even though that panel was all wrinkled up, this can still be perfectly straight. Should be able to fix that with these grippers. After taking some time and care with the decking, we'll take our door and quarter outside into the grass. A lot of times you can just start like this. After carefully massaging the door and the quarter for a good bit of time, I decided to flatten the quarter panel out and then throw it back in the brake to re-add that 90-degree bend. Next, our attention was placed on those little angled aluminum brackets that hold the doors together. The one on my driver door was pretty bent. Fortunately, I keep a special little tool just for this situation. Next, we just do everything we did earlier, but in reverse, reinstalling those aluminum brackets and the doors and quarters. Now that we have the door on, there's a problem. I took the jack and I threw it up under the underslung bar, jacked the car up, and okay, now that we've got this side all snapped back together, we get to do the exact same thing on the other side. So this is the spoiler breakaway piece, and you can see underneath this, like, I guess sheet metal bit that's sort of twisted itself apart here is designed so that it will break and not bend the entire spoiler. So if we get into the wall, like a lot of times if you're running the high side, you might tap the wall with the right rear corner. This piece of the car will break first, and that won't ruin all the downforce of the entire car, and you should still be able to be competitive even with that much spoiler left. After removing the old breakaway piece, I had to re-rivet the decking. Then, when I added the new panel back, I had to actually drill a couple of holes because not all 3 were in it already. We'll fast forward back through that assembly process. Okay, now things are going to become really technical. Do you see this silver piece that's bent? This is called a lower control arm, and what this does is this controls the position of the spindle and conversely the wheel. This adjusts our caster and camber, which more on that in a second. Do you see this complicated black piece? That's called the spindle. Right now, my spindle is at a very odd angle. It's leaning forward. You can tell because if you look at the shock, you can see that there's a huge difference in the angle of the shock and the spindle. The black lines in this diagram represent the steering axis. Our cars have an independent front suspension, which means the steering axis is determined by drawing an imaginary line through the top and bottom ball joint. The red line is a neutral line, which is determined by drawing a straight vertical line through the center of the contact patch of the tire. The difference in angle between these 2 lines is the caster angle. For a practical example of caster, let's imagine the wheels on a shopping cart. I want you to take notice of the trail, which is illustrated at the bottom of the 2 lines. Because a shopping cart wheel pivots at a point where it attaches to the shopping cart, the steering axis is actually a vertical line that's drawn straight through that point. This trailing distance is what you're feeling when you're pushing a shopping cart. The wheels naturally turn to face the direction of motion of the cart. In a car, the effect is a mild tendency for the front wheels to want to recenter themselves. If you took that shopping cart wheel and flipped it around, now you've got a ton of negative caster. If you've never tried this, try this the next time you go to the grocery store. The wheel just will not stay in that same direction. It will always try to flip around or go one direction or the other. Since my car now had a negative caster angle, that right front was acting like that shopping cart wheel if it was backwards, going all over. But this pales in comparison to the other, way more obvious issue that this control arm caused. This is a basic diagram of the front of our car as seen from above, with the steering rack being that weird contraption in the middle. Adding a kink to that right lower control arm will move the pivot point of the wheel backwards a little bit. Since the green tie rods or steering rods are going to remain the same length, this causes the toe of the car to be knocked completely out of whack. Toe is the angle of the wheels compared to the center line of the car. The effect of the bent control arm caused a toe-out condition, which means that there's a massive dead zone in the middle of the steering wheel where no steering happens even though I'm turning the wheel a whole bunch. Anyway, the upper control arm moved as well. It's mounted to these sliders, and you can see by the paint line that I have on there that it's moved down a bit. This has an effect on the caster, which will be more pronounced as the control arm travels. After fixing the upper control arm, I had to break out the old caster camber gauge to get the bottom control arm set up. Since I have a laser chassis, Laser's guide on setting caster and camber is a bit different from most other manufacturers. For us, we set caster and camber by first leveling the car. We use an angle finder on the frame rails to make sure it's level. Then we install the ride height sticks. These are predetermined lengths from Laser that simulate ride height. After that, we use the camber gauge, which is pretty straightforward, it's just a bubble level. For caster, we get the steering wheel straight, then turn it 180 degrees to the right, set this dial till the caster gauge reads 0, then turn the wheel 360 degrees back to the left, and then go see where the bubble reads. Important note, if you're going to do the left front, you'll actually turn the wheel to the left first instead of the right. My caster and camber numbers are published in the Laser chassis setup book, which is public on their website if you're curious. And with the power of editing, it is a day later, and we've found a problem. That is our 4-link plate that is completely sheared on both sides of the bolt. So as I've been working on my car this week, I've been taking the springs off each corner and throwing them on my homemade spring smasher, which, if you've been around racing, you know that this is the most jank-ass, like, backyard DIY piece of garbage. But I made it, it's mine, and it'll get me in the ballpark of where I need to be. So, let's do that. The spring smasher is basically just a fancy press with a scale attached to the end. You attach your shock and spring to this scale, and you're able to compress the shock and get what's called load numbers. So if you know that your car will handle best with 600 pounds on the right front when it's sitting at ride height, and you know that ride height needs to be about 15 inches if you measure the center to center on the shock absorber, you can put your shock and spring on the smasher, compress it to 15 inches, check the weight, and then move the coilover nut until the weight matches at that set length. After this is said and done, you can cross-reference with your scales and move your ballast around to get the correct ride height. So in this clip, I started to explain my left rear stacked spring setup, which is what's called a digressive stack, but I realized that I was ranting so much about this thing that it ended up being like, it could be its own 10-minute video. So I just want you to know that it's a digressive stack. When I'm in the pits, it sinks nice and low. When I step on the gas, it actually becomes, it acts like a stiffer spring, and it helps the car drive really hard off the left rear. It is 11:43 at night. I just got done making sure all the springs are smashed, making sure that all the body is the way it's supposed to be, so it's not flopping in the wind. Really just fixing the final bits of damage from last race. Everything is checked, everything is tight. The last things I have to do are load the car up and go racing tomorrow. And just like that, it's race day, but there's still some work to do, so we gotta go. All right, so my agenda for this morning. The last couple of things I have to do on the car. The biggest thing is I want to fix, let me show you here. I'd like to fix that hole that you can see down there. That protects our oil lines and oil cooler, that panel in there. So I want to fix that to make sure we don't get rocks taking out our oil lines. So that'll be first on the agenda. All right, so now I'm going to take this rod, which is set to be the same length as our shock and spring would be if it were at max travel on the right front. We'll throw that on there, lower the car, and just see if it hits the ground anywhere. Looks pretty wild with the right front raised up, sort of the way it is. But we found our first issue. This is rubbing. All right, we're ready to trial run this. It's a two-parter because I don't think it's gonna hit it first, but as soon as I jack the left rear up, it's gonna tip the car just that little bit extra, and we'll see if it hits that. Okay, left rear's jacked up. Isn't this ridiculous? This is how the car looks when it's on the track. Got the left rear jacked to the point where it's on the chain. If anything, the right side, the right front at least, should get higher because the right rear hasn't really traveled at all. get my foot under it. Wild. As I've been working on this, I came to the realization this shot canister will get totally destroyed if I crank the wheel all the way to the left, I think. So I'm gonna flip it, rotate it. There we go. Okay, now we put our skinny little load tire on, then focus on loading stuff up, which is gonna be a lot. All right, we made it. It is hot, like 90-some degrees out, and we're about to head out for practice, so hopefully the changes and everything that I've done to sort of correct the car and make it the way it's supposed to be are gonna work. So all that work hopefully is gonna work out. Let's see. All right, first few laps in the books, and it felt pretty good. Maybe a hair tight once, but the track has a lot of moisture, so that'll kind of make the car do wonderful things because it's got so much more grip. So for the heat race, we'll see where we're at, but I'll take a look at the times and see what we got. Okay, sorry it's a little loud. I started fourth and ended up third. The track is just a disaster. It's just so chunked up. It's like a cornfield. I can't even drive on it. The car's pretty tight because it's just so tacky and choppy. So what I need to do, I noticed that there's a bolt missing from the switch for my three-wheel braking. So I'm gonna go see if the parts trailer has a switch, and then I'll see if I can wire it in. But other than that, boy, I hope that track's better for the future, because 20 laps of that is just, ugh. Okay, so I want to explain a little bit about the changes that I've made to the car, so to deal with the conditions that we have. I don't know if it's going to tear up in the future like it did in the heat, but the track has a lot of moisture in it. So what I've done, I changed the right front compression to make it a little bit stiffer, just to ease into the bumps and not let the right front get over so hard. Then I took a couple of turns out of the right rear, the rebound, so that when I get out of the gas, the car gets to the front so I can turn a little bit, and changes the balance of the right, you know, gets the car off the right rear basically when I go into the corner. Helps unstick the car just a little bit, helps you turn. And then I took the J-bar on the chassis side and dropped it down a little bit. And so what that should do is that should free the car up a little bit, lower the roll center, shouldn't allow so much weight to get over to the right side, should keep the car maybe a little bit more stable through the corners with all these huge rutted up, you know, bumps. So let's see if those work or not. We'll be starting third. I was confident coming in tonight. Let's see if that three-wheel braking plus those other changes is what we need for the future. Okay, the disembodied voice of Joe Lusk is here to talk you through the feature. The first half isn't that interesting, but I do want to point out the way my car's driving. You'll notice the cars in front of me rotate a little bit quicker than my car does. You can tell, especially with the 5 car, how quickly he's able to get his car turned down towards the inside when he enters the corner, versus when my car is able to turn, which ends up feeling like it's about, I don't know, halfway through the corner. Something interesting about late models and this track surface on this night, the late models ride so low to the ground that they actually can dig up the surface of the track. And I'm aware that Clinton County had additional clay added to the surface, and I don't think it was completely integrated with the surface that was already there this night, which is one of the reasons why it tore up so bad. But unfortunately, as this race is about to get super, super interesting, because the track's so rough, my camera decides that it just wants to pan itself down and down and down until it starts looking only at my shoulder. Anyway, after running third for the first half of this race, I ended up jumping the cushion in 1 and 2 and driving across the roughest part of the track. And it was right at this moment where a huge problem developed, and my car started just driving so unbelievably tight. It made me 100% convinced that something was broken. So take a look at this clip taken from the second half of the race after I adjusted the camera under caution. Look at how much my hands are turning to the left as we go through 1 and 2 here. It's just disgusting, and it makes me sad to think about. It's a very helpless feeling to have the car just not want to turn. But if it wasn't bad enough, watching 3 and 4 here, I have to all but stop to get the car to turn. My post-race reaction to all this was pretty tame.
That got ugly. You think something is broke? Or?
I think something is broke, because it just would not turn. Right at the beginning, it was really good.
Yeah, I know it was.
Hey, it's Post-Race Joe here to explain the piece that caused all my problems. This is the right front nose support, and when I hopped the cushion going through 1 and 2, I actually bent this under. And if you can remember from earlier when we took the car and dropped it way down on that right front, I mean, I could barely fit my foot under the car, between the car and the ground. So this was just dragging, and when you've got weight going over onto that corner and you've got a tire there to help steer you, as soon as something that touches the ground isn't the tire, it takes all the weight off that corner, and now you've got no more steering happening. It's just shoveling. So there's our culprit. Join us next time to learn what we had to do to turn this into this.
Hell yeah!